GamingBolt presents 15 things you need to know before you buy Knack 2. You wouldn't be blamed if you were amongst the significant number of people that are pessimistic about how Knack 2 turns out simply because of how underwhelming its predecessor was. That makes total sense. Knack was lackluster in every way imaginable, and it was a surprise to many people that Knack was even receiving a sequel. But it is receiving a sequel, and believe it or not, there's actually reason to be cautiously optimistic. Here in this feature, we're going to list 15 things that we feel you should know about Knack 2. 15 things to help change your mind if you're on the fence about the game even now. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. Co-op. Unlike the original Knack, where the co-op was only added as an afterthought and was often considered an uneven and frustrating experience, Knack 2 has been built by Sony as a co-op experience right from the get-go. It's much more of a focus this time around, so that the second player never feels surplus to requirements or out of place. Hopefully, this decision will bear fruit of a much better co-op game. Drop-in co-op. What's special about the co-op in Knack 2 is that it is drop-in and drop-out co-op, giving players the ability to join into the game whenever they wish and leave whenever they wish. The game gives no narrative explanation for why the second playable character exists, and the character is always there for players to jump into. This is going to ensure that co-op play becomes much more fluid and smooth, and an integral part of the gameplay. Refined platforming. Platforming is going to receive a significant upgrade in the upcoming sequel. Where in the first game it was rudimentary and boring, Knack 2 will add more abilities and moves for the players to use, such as hovering and growing smaller in size by disposing of parts of Knack, for instance. There will also be areas you couldn't reach before, hidden pathways and items, and lots more, so players can look forward to more layered platforming this time around. Larger focus on platforming. Obviously, given the fact that the platforming is going to be improved in Knack 2 than the state we saw in its predecessor, it's pretty clear that it's going to be a much larger focus on the moment-to-moment gameplay this time around. Platforming is going to be much more of a focus in Knack 2, and it looks like it's going to be more layered and expanded than before, significantly so. More challenging puzzles. Puzzle solving was an important part of the gameplay loop in Knack, and it looks like there will be plenty of it in the upcoming Knack 2. In addition to the platforming-related puzzles we've already discussed, such as the ones where players will have to change Knack's size to fit into smaller environments, you can expect all sorts of puzzles in the game to be more challenging than its predecessor and more layered thanks to added gameplay mechanics. New moves. It really does feel in a lot of ways like Knack 2 is the actual realization of what the original game set out to do, but ultimately failed. That feeling permeates in the combat as well. Knack will have plenty of moves at his disposal this time around, rather than the basic punches and kicks like the original game. There will be a number of moves and attacks, from grapples and punch kicks to flips and anything else that you can imagine, all of which the player will unlock throughout the duration of the game. Updated combat. As you may have gathered, combat will be heavily upgraded in Knack 2. Like so many other parts of the game, combat was a pretty bare-bones feature in the first game, and like so many of those features, it feels like it is receiving a number of significant upgrades in the sequel to help flesh it out and turn it into a full-fledged aspect of the core gameplay itself. Skill tree. Knack 2 is going to be bigger and better than its predecessor in more ways than one, and one of the ways it's expanding upon the base gameplay of the original is including a skill tree for players to play with. We've mentioned that players will be unlocking new moves for Knack throughout the game, but that is not all they will be unlocking. The skill tree will have all manner of upgrades for players. Upgrade Knack. That, of course, means that players will be upgrading Knack throughout the game with the help of the skill tree, unlocking new combat moves, new ways to move and traverse the environments, new abilities, and ways to enhance their existing abilities as well. Knack was a pretty straightforward experience when it first came out, and there wasn't much variation to its gameplay, so it's good to see that that might not be the case with its sequel. More nuanced difficulty. The inconsistent, often cheap, and unfair difficulty levels of Knack were cited as one of the game's biggest failings. Players of Knack 2 are hopefully not going to have any such complaints. The development team working on the game have worked in a number of ways to make sure that the game has a more nuanced and consistent level of difficulty, and that players actually feel comfortable with whatever difficulty they choose to play on. Easy mode. Knack 2 will have 4 difficulty level options for players to choose from as opposed to the 2 difficulty options in its predecessor, making sure that there's a difficulty level for all kinds of players, and one of those options is going to be an easy mode. In addition, rather than being completely unchallenging like it was in the original Knack, almost to the point of being pointless and boring, easy mode will hopefully be a lot more balanced this time around. Branching difficulty paths. Another tactic that Knack 2 is going to employ to make the game more balanced and more accessible will be to have branching paths built into the game's level design itself. These paths will be different from each other in various respects and also in terms of how difficult they are. So if you ever come across a section that you find you're not capable of clearing, you can always go back and take an alternate route, one that might possibly be easier. More checkpoints. It's also been confirmed by the developers that Knack 2 will have a lot more checkpoints than its predecessor did. People often criticize the original Knack for having infrequent and distant checkpoints, and accuse the game of trying to manufacture cheap and unfair difficulty by the placements of these checkpoints. The developers this time around are trying to make the game difficult in much more natural ways, so expect a lot more checkpoints. Tank combat sections. Knack 2 will feature entire tank combat sections, another new addition over the first game. While players often came across enemy tanks in the first game, the second game will allow players to take control of them and enter into a first-person tank combat mode. Like every other aspect in this game, these parts can be played solo, but have still been made with co-op in mind. Looking to be a major improvement. Knack is no one's favorite game, and a lot of people will no doubt discount its sequel exactly for that reason, but maybe they shouldn't. We know we're yet to play the game properly, but from everything we've seen and heard of Knack 2, it isn't just a shameless cash grab. It's trying to actually improve upon its predecessor by adding new mechanics and dimensions to the gameplay. Knack 2 is looking to be a major improvement over its precursor. Here's hoping that it actually succeeds. And that'll be about it for this one. If you guys like what we're doing at GamingBolt, please consider subscribing to our channel, and I'll see you guys on the next video.